So I'm thrilled to be up here with two amazing coaches and two amazing people. First up, now entering his 7th year at the helm of the men's soccer program, fresh off his 2nd College Cup and an appearance at the national championship game. Woo-hoo! A member of the class of 2003. Woo!
4.
4?
Yeah. Last season was 2003. It's confusing.
I'm gonna have to get a better note right. And more importantly, what dorm?
Dylan.
The McFarland family men's soccer coach, Chad Riley. Woo. And joining Chad, we have a 4-time national champion coach and a 3-time All-American. Did I get that right?
You did.
All right. Who's entering her 3rd season at the head of the Irish volleyball program, Salima Rockwell. So these are our volunteer leaders that have come in from all over the world. I think we're 300 and some strong, and they come back every year to learn about leadership. Awesome. So let's talk a little bit about leadership and what that means to you. I'm going to start with you, Chad. You coached under the legendary Bobby Clark. You had to learn a lot from him. Let's talk about that.
Yeah, I think that's great. Well, first, thanks for all you do, because it's amazing no matter where we go, cities, countries, different things, and you're the sort of personification of the Notre Dame family everywhere, and so it's amazing, and it helps me in so many different ways, but it helps, our recruits, our current guys, the alums that graduate. So thanks for all you do. But yeah, leadership, I think it's always an interesting topic because it's one of those things that, the longer I do this, because I'm the leader of the soccer team, and soccer is just sort of our game we play, but you sort of feel like a cook more than anything else, and you never know what's necessarily going to work or not work. But I think, early in my career, I was lucky. I worked with a West Point grad at Dartmouth, and we talked a lot about leadership and trying to foster it and develop it on a team. But at the same time, in my first head coaching position, it's like, okay, what does that actually mean to me? Because there's a lot of books, a lot of information. I thought, he came up to it, and I think it was through West Point's leadership program, but basically it's like that vision, direction, and motivation, right? And those 3 things, and always tending to those is like, for whatever organization you're leading, do you have that vision? Have you articulated it? You don't have to talk about it every day, and at different times, different pieces of it become important, but it's that vision. Then the direction, right? And for us, it's like different tactical parts of the game, recruiting, different things like that. Different parts of the season, like this spring was different than last spring, because last spring we were coming off a disappointing fall. This spring we're certainly disappointed, but it's in a slightly different way, and so how do you tweak things for that? And then, for me, that motivation piece is important. I think I've recruited poorly if I have to motivate all the time, but if I have to insert myself strongly a few times a season, you feel that it's there because there's a lot on the guys. But I do think that was that sort of vision, or have you painted the vision, direction, right? That's where your technical knowledge comes in, and then I think that motivation piece, and then I think in college, I distinguish myself as, I always joke with recruits' parents that I'm not a disgruntled pro coach, like I'm not playing, I feel, and from Bobby, I think my old coach was the first person I saw this from to achieve at a high level, is that you're an educator, not kind of a pro coach. And so I think a lot of it's fostering that environment, and then, kind of empowering the guys on our team as they grow to sort of take ownership and responsibility for certain things, which is also scary as someone that, if you're a coach, you're a little bit of a control freak type person. Yeah. And so letting go of some things is always challenging, but important, because then that's where I feel like things really take off. And I think with, leading volunteer organizations, in some way that's like, college sports now. I mean, we have rules and different things, but at the end of the day, like, the student athletes have a lot of a strong voice now, which is great. So you're always kind of planting those seeds, convincing them what's the right thing to do, similarly to, I'm sure, what you guys have to rely on when you're mobilizing your troops.
So this question's not on here, but you picked up on that really quickly. Control freak. Is that true? How does that work for you?
Ooh, well, it is in some ways. I think especially if you've been a former player and had success at a high level, you do things a certain way and you do things your way and you know what works for you. And I think over time you realize that that doesn't work for everyone. So understanding what motivates people, what resonates with people, how can you get the best out of them? That's what I see as part of my job, is getting the best. And I did that as a player. Maybe inherently, you just make people around you better, you give them some confidence. But when you're in this position, it's how much do you let go? Like how much are they in charge of? But then you realize the more of a voice they have, the more they feel involved in the process, the harder they work for you, the better they are for you. Then they have an investment. They are invested in your company, in your business, in your program, and they will do anything for you if they feel like they're being heard. So in that sense, it's like, all right, I can step back here in this moment and allow you this responsibility. You make these decisions, leadership council, you guys work hard on this and see what makes sense for us right now in this moment, and let's integrate some of it. Maybe it's not all of it, but at least they're being heard, even if we're not implementing it.
So when I had children, I have 5 children. When I had children, I thought, okay, this is how I parent, right? And I'm gonna parent them. And I had my first one, and so that's how I parented. Then I had my second one. Wow, this was really different. And then I had that third one. And I found I had to parent 5 different ways, and that was a surprise. Is that similar to being a coach? And what does that look like?
Yeah, I think so, exactly, because I think, there's another level of understanding when you have your own kids, because you sort of think that you know everything, and then, I think,
I don't?
yeah, well, moms still do, dads don't as much, but then I do. It's like you can't recruit your kids, so you kind of have to adjust to them. You just get what you get, but I do. I think it is like that's you worry about creating the right environment, and then it's like what we're going through right now. We have 4 to 5 meetings individually with guys on our team, at least kind of structurally throughout the year, and that's where you get to know them kind of on that individual basis and start to learn what are some of the things that make them tick. And then, one of the things for me, which is fun at this time in my career, is this is the longest I've been at a place, so I know all the guys on our team since they were, sophomores transitioning to being a junior in high school, and so you sort of build that relationship a little easier, and so you just kind of know it in the back of your head. But exactly, it's like individually that way, but also teams. I always say, like, this team next fall will only ever exist once, right? People graduate that, and so I do really keep the seniors in the forefront of my mind with every decision in the fall. But it is each, you try to say each season is this kind of unique journey, but then also on an individual level, it's like, yeah, everybody ticks a little bit differently.
That's great. Salima, you were a student athlete at Penn State, an outstanding student athlete, I might add, and you won a handful of national titles. How has your perspective of being an effective coach and a leader evolved over time?
Yeah, I think you learn so much, and it's kind of what I said earlier as a player, and how when you transition into coaching, first of all, you realize just because you played at a high level, you don't really know how to teach what you know. Like I remember my first time, I was a setter, so that's the person that gives the ball to the big people that smack it down. I was working on teaching my setters, technically training, and I'm just like, hey, just get that ball to sit, get it to stop, get that ball to float through the zone, and they're like, how? I'm like, I don't know, you just do it. And I'm like hiding behind the curtain, like setting all these different balls. I'm like, what am I actually doing? How am I gonna train that? So for me, learning over time how to train, that was one part of it as an assistant coach, but really I think the biggest thing over time is learning how people learn. I have learned over time that there are kinesthetic learners, there are visual, there are auditory, right? All of these things. So how are we coaching them? When we scout, my scout has changed over years, just thinking about how some people, what resonates with them and how do they learn this information. You've got a little bit of a paper scout. Some of them have headshots on them, because some people see this person, I know what I'm gonna do against her, or I know her name. Some people know the numbers of the jerseys. Some people understand when you do a shot chart and everyone's hitting in this direction, or they need to see it on film. They need to see it over and over again. So we kind of combine things that way. But as far as leadership, I think my leadership has evolved and changed because I understand more how to manage. It's so much more about managing people, managing the program, and how can I lead them to a place to get to the other side. My goal, along with some of the other things I mentioned, is to help them become resilient. That was the biggest thing that I learned, getting through adversity and not just stopping there. Let's push through to the other side. And how do you get there? Now, old school, when I played, I had an old school coach. We got to the other side in a totally different way. It was you push, you push, you push, you crush. I learned that way. That's how I grew up. It was the harder you worked and the more you would grind on the court. But times have changed. There are things we can't do. There are a certain amount of hours you can train in the gym. So what does that look like? What does that look like? And it's understanding, as the world has learned about motivation. We're learning more about how to get the most out of people. So I think for me, my leadership style, it's always kind of been that way, but how do I get you to do this without having to crush you through it? And I think understanding that and getting through those processes have been a big learning curve for me.
So what do you think? Is there a difference in how that crushing style or lack of it works if you have young men on your team or young women?
Yeah, for me, I think I've learned, again, you sort of, like anybody, when you start a thing, you think you're like, all right, yeah, I'm the person that's probably figured it out, and like, no matter what I do, we're just going to be successful. You realize that that's not true. And so then you get into more of like the principles sort of like why people end up being successful. And this is what we always kind of question what we're doing all the time, because it's like times change all the time. The conference changes, the world changes, the environments, coming out of COVID changed the kids' high school years, and so trying to adapt to that. But I think there's things that are always, I go back and forth, but like, can you really develop people, or do you create an environment that's generally competitive, and then they have this decision in a supportive environment? Because I think that's the difference of being an educator. If it's a professional team, you're like, all right, you do it in 2 months, or I'm going to go get another player. Here, it's like, okay, we're committed to you as long as you're committed to us, and the transfer portal's changed, all that kind of stuff. But for me, it's that part of, I learned a lot. Just we're in the best soccer conference in the country by, big sort of statistical points with that. And like, my first season here, I was like, oh my gosh, we're not going to win like maybe a game. But the team just like, seriously, that's how I felt. And, but all of a sudden you're like, oh gosh, these guys are getting better competing. And I'm someone that's all about the process. And like when something's happened, we evaluate it. I'm not a big preacher to the team, or crush them after a defeat, or make them feel on top of the world after a win. You just go on to the next thing, and then at the season you reflect and you cheer and do all those things. But anyway, so for me, it's how do we create this like healthy competitive environment, and then it's up to each individual through the course of their time to respond to that environment. And then you don't know what the outcome will be, but so how do I do that? That's the fall schedule, that's the spring schedule, that's the recruiting that I do. Like the more competition on the team. It's John Wooden, one of the famous, obviously basketball coaches, but it is true. It's like the bench is your best friend. Like if you don't want to sit on the bench, you got to beat out that person. And so you don't even have to sort of coach and talk as much if you get that environment right. And then all of a sudden, it's the ones that respond to it. And you never know that. I mean, that's the hard part in recruiting. We get it right a lot, and I think it's because Notre Dame has such a strong identity, and it's everywhere in the world. And when they meet you, so we self-select, I think, a lot in recruiting when we get it. And so we get strong people who are motivated, who are resilient, and we help foster that as well. But for me, it's about creating that competitive environment with some coaching and motivation, but then it's up to that individual to respond and decide whether to be resilient. Like, I don't yell at running. You either run harder than the person next to you, or that guy's getting better than you. And if I get that stuff right, then everything else is a lot simpler.
So your board, go ahead.
Well, I was going to say within that, but all of that is this whole idea of growth mindset, right? So we talk about fixed minds and minds that are open to growth and change. And there are a lot of student athletes that come here that are used to being very successful in everything. Academically, they're the best. They're not used to ever getting anything lower than a B in their life, or they are the best in volleyball or in their sport, and what happens when they fail. So my goal for them is to understand that failure is an opportunity to learn, right? So we have a safe environment in our gym where, hey, if we're working on something, if we're trying to hit this exact shot and you miss it 10 times, working on getting it, that's okay, because it is about the process. And as soon as they open their minds, and that took a while, that took me 2 full years to get them in that mode where they understand you are working on this to get better. Once you do this, then you're gonna get where you need to be. It was hard. A lot of them making errors, mistakes at a high level against the top teams. Same for us in the conference. Our conference has grown and grown. We have teams in the Final Four consistently. And now we added Stanford, who's always in the Final Four, national championship teams. It's hard to play against those teams and feel okay about yourself. But once they understand it's about the process and where we're headed, that's when they're able to really, really flourish. You doing all right there?
I want to be on your team. Thank you.
I was just recruiting.
Yeah.
So we're talking about creating environments, and how do you create culture? And how does the culture change from team to team? And are you setting that, or is the team setting that?
Yeah, I can talk about our process, and I do. I think a lot of it is through recruiting. I just think that's, as long as, like we always talk about, like, Jack does a good job, and Pete, now our AD, does a great job. It's like, really doubling down on our distinctions. Like, one, I'm not going to recruit you after you're here, so I want you to be excited, and then, yeah, there'll be good days, bad days, all that. That's just life. But I think it is through recruiting and being committed to being like, okay, because talent is so appealing as a coach, and you do need it, but at the same time, if it doesn't work within this environment, it doesn't matter. So I think there's that, and then I think for me, it's interesting because I know the guy that sort of started the club program in the 60s, and through a lot of the sort of first varsity years, I know those guys, and then I've been lucky, and then I'm obviously been here longer than it seems now, but so I know the whole thing. And so something we did when I got back is like we had this good culture. It was like, okay, we haven't kind of put it into words yet, and so we did kind of this retreat led by a couple of our sports psych people in the department, and came up with like a mission statement with values that, like, yeah, we helped them, fill in some blanks, but really it was from the team. And so then it's like, how do you live those? And then that's obviously my biggest job, and the job of our captains is to try to be the example that you want everybody to be. So that's me on the sideline. That's everything that I do and say. You try to really live that, because I think that's the first layer. Same thing with our captains. And then every couple of years we revisit it and be like, hey, are there any values we want to take away, we want to add, we want to do different things? Do these still make sense? And what's been really cool to see for me is doing that 3 times with 3 different teams at Notre Dame, and just how the discussions are similar and unique because the people are different, but whatever we're doing is kind of getting below the surface, and those values are still meaningful and important to the team that way. But I think it's kind of the culture. Like, can you put it down on paper? And it does. It's got to be collaborative. It can't be just me saying to the guys, like, here's our values, and they're like, oh, wow, okay. Because you just never know if they'll resonate, but through that process, and then you're just kind of constantly looking at them, reassessing them, and then something I'm trying to get better at as a coach in this stage is like, all right, how does any teaching moment come back to one of those values, right? If someone's, one of our values is excellence, right? And it's like, all right, well, you're not going to class, like, how's that an excellent thing to do? And they're like, oh, it's true. And so usually you can't argue back with it, but then finding those times to use those, and then they really become part of our kind of everyday life as a team.
Yeah, we very similar way in how we approach it. I started out coming in on my own before we did that, just with 3 things that I wanted them to think about, and every single thing they did. That was preparation, intention, and effort. So those things were our kind of how we started, and where you prepare in life, and that means off the court. What are you doing on the weekend? Are you ready for practice on Monday? How are you with your nutrition? Are you recovering? All of those things. Are you ready to go when we step on the court? And then everything you're doing is with intention. So when I say, hey, are we doing this? Are we just passing back and forth to warm up? Or am I thinking about my technique? Am I thinking about my form right now? Am I doing things with intention? And then, of course, giving the effort. So that was kind of our initial umbrella. And then when we let them go, it was about the values and standards. And the key to that is defining them. So when someone says, oh, I want to work hard, what does that look like? What does that look like? And they sat down as a team and said, okay, that means we don't let any ball fall without somebody going hard after it. That's one thing, an identifiable measure of the standard. They had other standards like that. Well, we want to communicate well. What is that? It's very broad. So when it's a good point or we lose a point, we touch, we make eye contact, and we're communicating whether it's nonverbal or verbally. And I think for us, defining those helped us really cut down our language. Our language is very consistent. Even how we train, we have technical training, tactical training, game training. So are we in technical mode here right now where we're focusing on the process? All right, we were working on left hip away, whatever it is, process oriented. Tactical, now we're thinking about strategy. Am I in the right spot? Am I doing what I want to do against their offense? And game for us means failure recovery. We're now in game mode. We let everything else go out the window. I'm competing here right now. What I tell them all the time, the difference between the great teams and the good teams is the ability to come back after a mistake or an error quickly. I mean, that's the biggest difference. When you're playing it's margins. We are playing at such thin margins. And if you're able to come back and not let points bleed or not get caught up in these ruts, again, that's with everything in life. You know how that is when you're in the funk and you can't get something going. And hey, we're going to problem solve. And I think for me as a leader, that's been a very big evolution for me, all of those things. And I think over time, too, problem solving and understanding what's important instead of, woe is me, we can't do this, or I can't figure this out. Even for myself, how can I problem solve and get this done? When I realized the transfer thing isn't really a big, great thing here when I showed up at Notre Dame. It's hard to get transfers in. I didn't realize the extent of it, but I wasn't going to be like, okay, everyone else is just loading up with transfers across the country. What am I going to do? Well, I'm going to recruit better, the younger kids. I'm going to foster this program of excellence. So anyway, I'm going on a tangent.
I like that.
I'm done talking. Sorry.
Okay, so let's flip it a little bit. I may be a tiny bit biased, but these are the greatest volunteer leaders in the country, not in the world, right? I mean that. And you are the envy of my peers because of the fact that you're all here. This is just unheard of, right? This plays itself out everywhere. You see it when you go on the road. What can we do to support you more?
Yeah, I mean, it's hard because you're already doing so much. And I think the biggest challenge always is that sort of connecting, because I do think this is the tricky part with it all, right, is like it's there, and now whether someone accesses it is always kind of up to them once they get into that next stage. But something we're trying to do better is I feel like a few guys on the team will connect with the clubs like once they, everything lines up right before they come to Notre Dame. But then now how quickly can we flip that when they graduate to like get them to that first event? And so I do think for me, that's one of my goals in the next little bit is just that like kind of like, okay, yeah, you've moved away from campus, but you haven't kind of left the Notre Dame family, and how quickly can we make that connection with some of our student athletes right after they graduate? I think that's one of the areas that I want them, because we, Jack and again our always talk about, we do a good job and we pump everybody up on the website and social media that becomes a pro athlete. We're like, okay, that's like, one out of, however many hundred, and it's cool, but it's like, how do we need to do a better job of telling the story of like, all right, this young woman or young man starting ACE, like, whatever that is. But anyway, I think that connection after graduation to me is like that next sort of step to say like, all right, how do we get them? Because then I do think, for you guys, it's the same idea. It's like, when you're building out your team to make your club successful, it's like finding those people that are, one of the teammate values we talk about is like being a connector, like who's a connector, and then all of a sudden, because it's like you can have a club organization, but all of a sudden you have a few, people who are really special at doing it, and then the thing just sort of takes off, which obviously Notre Dame's done that, and you guys are doing that. But yeah, I do. I think the simple one is like, how do we connect quickly? Because there's that window, like, to connect quickly with that group. And I think, I coached at Dartmouth before this, and I thought that was something that they always did better. Not better, but it was interesting because they had fraternities and sororities, which I don't want. But one of the things that was strong is there was this, like, somehow they were just like very, and so it's like, how do we kind of even build that quickly? So then, it just
That's a good reminder.
It's a really good point. And I was thinking as you're talking, and I don't know how it can work, but bringing, even if we go to speak at a club, maybe we have a student athlete with us, or maybe there's someone. I mean, last year I had 4 or 5. I know the student body this happens. 4 or 5 student athletes that had jobs lined up already. They knew where they were going. They knew they were going to live in Chicago. They knew they were going to be in San Diego. Maybe that's a way of connecting them even prior to them leaving, going there, being able to engage with the clubs early on. Again, I don't know all the logistics or rules around it, but that could be a good way of just preemptively saying, hey, we're going to be there. I want to connect, and this is already a connection that we have. But for you all, like Chad said, I mean, it's crazy. When I first got hired, it was so funny. I got my Notre Dame gear on, I'm going recruiting, and everyone's got their call, right, their thing. And, at Penn State, it's like, we are Penn State. And so I'm walking through airports, and everyone's going, go Irish. And I'm like, oh, crap, is there a thing? Like, what do you say back? I panicked, and I was like, so I'm like texting my assistant. I'm like, Craig, what do we say? And he's like, I have no idea. Let me find out. Oh, my gosh, it was so funny, and it happened so often. And I couldn't believe, certainly when I got here and realized how small the university is, with 8,500 students or whatever it is. And I've come from big institutions, Texas and Penn State, with the alumni connection and the people that are connected to Notre Dame is greater than anything I've ever experienced. It really, really is, and it's really, really cool. And then the second question is, if they don't know I'm a coach, or if I'm just kicking around in a nice Notre Dame thing, they're like, what dorm did you live in? And I don't know any of the dorms, and I'm like,
just say Dylan.
So great, yeah. So funny. So anyway, my point is, it's awesome. What you do already is so visible. It's so palpable. Like, you can feel it everywhere. And this is someone coming in, just ending my second year from the outside. We can all feel it. And anything you can do to help our programs. I mean, we're not ever, even if you come and want to speak, I run a business, a technological company, or there's a woman that's a scientist. We've got like 7 STEM kids, which is killing my practice schedule, but it's awesome. It's awesome. Come and speak. Like, we want people in the gym to continue. Like, I love the academic integrity. I love the academic excellence at Notre Dame, and I'm leaning so far into it to help our student athletes create opportunities. And I think for me, opportunities and connections in the gym, my gym is open. So you can, not always, but reach out to Dolly and say, hey, I'm going to be on campus. Can I pop in the gym? I always have our girls run over, introduce themselves, and then invariably someone's like, hey, let's connect. Do you need a mentor? Is this a thing? You all can do that as well. That would be super welcome.
Cool.
And awesome.
Can I go on a trip with you?
Yes, sure. Yeah, absolutely.
Good. I knew if I asked in front of you, she'd have to say yes. Right?
That'd be awesome. It'd be fun.
It would be so much fun.
It'd be so fun.
Okay, so you just gave a perspective of someone who didn't go to school here, didn't live in Dillon.
Where is that?
You grew up in this, right? And then you left, and then you came back as a coach. Mm-hmm. Is it different? Is it what you thought it would be?
I mean, coaching is a lot different than I thought it would be, for sure. Notre Dame, I think it's, it always changes a little bit. I think I always laugh, like, one of the funniest things when you first get your parking pass, and, like, you're used to making up some sort of lie as you come up to the the, 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 And now they just sort of wave at you, and I still haven't gotten used to that because I'm always like, can I park there? And then it's funny too. You just, because, some of the people don't sort of change, and it makes me reflect, like, one of our public VP guy, Lou Nani, right? I remember one of my friends storing stuff at his house over the summer. I forgot what the connection was, and it just hit me. I was like, oh man, I remember Lou's kids were little, and he was probably my age now, and I thought he was this really old sort of guy at that time, and you're like, gosh.
I just want to remind you before you go any further, Lou and I are the same year.
But what I mean is, now, you sort of like, oh gosh, these kids were born after I graduated from here. So I do. I think I've just, as soon as I didn't grow up with anyone from my family going to Notre Dame, and it just, as soon as the connection happened, it was this weird feeling of like, oh, this is the place for me. And I moved around quite a bit growing up, and so it's always felt like home to me. So I think it has changed, but I do, at least in my team, and then I was speaking at Duncan, they have a cool thing they do with some of their guys in the dorm, just like having different people from campus talk and come over and talk about character. But what's cool to me is, like, every little things obviously always change, but like the sort of character and the students, like, it's kind of this, I call my team like a throwback team. Like, they hang out with the class of 85 at some of our things, and they're just talking, their friends are the same, the nicknames are similar, but there's that same, and then that similar vibe just all the way across campus of just like really good young men and women who are ambitious, who I think even more so now, the values and what Notre Dame tries to create, on campus and around the world, resonates so strongly with them, that it's just really cool to see that things change. We have buildings, but more buildings and things like that. But the student and the spirit of them, to me, is very similar to every year I've ever known it.
That's great. Abby, how much time do we have? 10 minutes. Great. I want to ask another question, and then I might just throw it out to you guys. Missy Conboy, who is your sport administrator, is that right?
Yes.
Is a dear friend of mine, and I watched and talked with her throughout the recruiting process as she recruited you. And you were a little resistant, right? I mean, I just want to say, the secondhand, but and because this was not something that you thought you had in your plan.
No, it wasn't. It wasn't.
Tell us about that.
It wasn't on my radar, not because it was Notre Dame. I stepped back from coaching in 2018. I was had some health things going on, family stuff, and I'd been coaching for, that was about 18 years at that point, and kind of stepped back, and I actually got roped into commentating, which was awesome. So I was doing TV, I was calling games. That escalated to a level that I never thought it would, and it was awesome. So I was like, okay, this is what I'm doing for a couple of years. Like, I was doing that, and so when Missy called, this was right before the regional final to get to the Final Four, and my husband always gives me a hard time because I got out of coaching because it was a lot and it was intense, but I was still prepping for games like I was playing the game, but I wanted to be, the best commentator and talk, tactically about both teams. So I was all into all the matches, and so Missy called, and I was like, well, I'm not coaching. Like, what are you talking about? Like, whatever. That's great, but no, I'm not. I'm calling the games. I'm busy. Whatever. Thank you. Bye. Right? That was a quick, very nice conversation. I'm not coaching. So of course, in Missy fashion, she came back to me and she's like, "Look, I just wanna talk to you. Just give me some time to talk to you about this." And I was so stressed out because I was thinking about that. Then another job came up at the same time, perhaps at my alma mater. So then I was completely stressed out and trying to get ready for these matches. And I was like, I don't want to talk to anybody. Everyone stopped calling me. So I said no again. And then Missy called me again right before the Final Four. She's like, let me just get you to campus. I was like, I cannot come to campus. But then I started really thinking about things and my life and what I missed about coaching. And the hard part about commentating, you can influence as much as you can, and say as much as you want about the student athletes on the air to really elevate the sport, but I didn't have that. I didn't have that connection with the student athletes. It really made me think. So long story. So I got with my little, circle of trust. I had my whiteboard, which yes, I have a whiteboard in my house. And so I put all my options. I'm like, okay, broadcasting, alma mater, Notre Dame, like what am I doing? And what do I want? And really, the more I thought about it, I was like, this is an incredible opportunity. Because Notre Dame is one of those schools, and we all as coaches talk about programs, like if you ever become a head coach, what job, can you get it done? Are they providing the support? Do you have the support from the administration, not just financially? All of those things. Is it the name? Is it the location? Notre Dame is always one of those schools where you're like, man, you could get it done there. So the more I thought about it, I was like, I'm going to consider this. So I got secretly flown out to the bowl game, which was awesome. And I had the opportunity to talk to everybody while I was there. Like, it was really cool. I sat down with Jack, I sat down with Missy, and then my last meeting was Marcus. I'm like, what are you doing? So, and he's all just Marcus fashion, chill and cool. And I'm like, I don't know much about what's going on, but I know this is your first game as a head coach ever. So why are you talking to me? He's like, this is what we do. This is what we do. I want to talk to you about why I wanted to be the head coach here, why I'm here, what's important. It was so cool. So the whole process was awesome. He definitely sealed the deal. Just saying. And there you go. That's it. That's the Reader's Digest version.
You probably don't know this, but I was supposed to meet with you to talk a little bit about alumni at that game, and I got COVID. And so I still, to this day, feel very invested in the recruiting process of you, and I'm glad you came.
Let it go. That's my story. Sorry, that was long.
Okay, Chad, when you go out on the road, and do you work with any of the clubs?
Yeah, I think.
When you are in a place for a game, is there something that they can do? Show up for the game, maybe.
That's probably, that is the tricky part now with the kids' schedules, whereas you used to go, a day early or things like that. Usually you're just sort of flying in that night and go, but it is coming to the game, even just emailing like a quick note to the, any cool emails I get, I always read to the team, but it is coming to the game. There's always, the parents seem like they travel everywhere now, which is great. So there's usually some time afterwards and just kind of saying hi at those things. But that is the biggest challenge, is like because of the demands of the school and just the crazy part with the way conferences are now, the width of the country. It is, you're sort of in and out, but I think just coming to the game. But then it is like, I have an email address that I check all the time, and it's just like sending those notes, staying connected that way. But it is coming to the game. That's the biggest support that we can get.
Good, because we are now invested in you, right?
There we go.
Okay, so we have like 5 minutes. Questions? Anybody have a question? Right here.
How do you present Notre Dame to prospective players that really are not associated with Notre Dame? It's all totally new to them.
How do you present Notre Dame to prospective players who are not familiar with Notre Dame and it's all new to them?
Yeah, I think, we have, I think over time, just even the information, that first step is, from afar, right? It's going to be the things through the admissions department. And then I always, as you get on, there's kind of 2 movies that, obviously Rudy's one of them, but then the Hesburgh documentary, I always thought gives a really unbelievable picture of what Notre Dame sort of, was and is trying to be. And then I think the biggest thing, once we're committed to someone and they're very interested in us coming to campus, we have some different presentations, but it is getting them to walk around, meet with a professor, meet with students in the dorm, spend time with our students, and that's the way that they really, because it's, you can put it into words enough, but at the end of the day, you have to come here and you have to feel it, and then that's what kind of ignites that passion for people.
Yeah, for me, I was in sales. I was in medical pharmaceutical sales for a little while when I got out, and I know that just in that moment, it's really easy to sell something you believe in. And man, believing in this place is not hard to do. It's crazy, even from the outside. And I think to answer your question, for me, what's important, I think, about the parents. If someone's interested in Notre Dame, they're generally high academic, right? They understand, they get it already. They may not have the connection or the history. So really focusing in on what they're interested in, and you talk about the graduation rates, you talk about the placement rates to whatever advanced degree they're looking for, all the numbers, the alumni connection, the connection to people, and that's, for me, the biggest thing, and how they're gonna be supported. That for forever is real. They're gonna be connected for the rest of their life. So any way that we can illustrate that and have them understand how that separates us from the Dukes or the North Carolinas or the other schools, high academic schools they're looking at. And then, like Chad said, yeah, bring in the campus. For me right now, I'm selling a lot of me, what I've done, right? And that's kind of marrying the two, the volleyball with the academic piece on campus. And those are important, the academic piece, but really the connection for the rest of your life and being set up for the rest of your life. That's what I like to talk to the parents about.
And thank you for saying 4 for forever, because I used to say 4 for 40, and my 40th reunion.
Exactly.
It can't
That's
be
over.
over.
It
That's
can't,
it. So
yeah.
now it's 4 for forever.
That's right.
Exactly.
Do we have another question? Right here.
The transfer portal has changed everything in college athletics. How do you create a culture of accountability and growth and balancing the challenge of, hey, somebody who isn't playing right now might be gone next year? How do you think through that?
Yeah, again, I do. I think you think of it, kind of broadly, and then each case can be individual. I think for me, I'm sort of staking my career on, in general, we're going to be a 4-year program. You're going to come in here and develop over time. Now, if there's a big hole because of injuries or just things didn't work out, you don't want to let the team down, necessarily, because it's like quarterbacks, goalkeepers, like things like that end up becoming positions. So you do want to always pay attention to it, because it's like anything, it's, I think there's always sometimes a first reaction to be like, oh, we do it right, like at Notre Dame, we don't need to change, but you're always changing a little bit. And so it's like evaluating what can that do for your program, and then each sport is quite different with that. But for us, it's, again, become a distinguishing factor, like the classes we've got coming in this couple of years of young students. It's some of the best that I've ever had, and part of it's because they're not getting recruited by other places, because most of the ACC they won't have a freshman on their team now. They'll just take from, sort of smaller conferences and build their team, full of, sophomores and above. So I think it's created a great opportunity for us, not even in the transfer portal, but just because, our biggest challenge, we have 9.9 scholarships to, for a roster of 28 people. So that's usually, sometimes kids want to come and we're like, well, we just don't have enough money to make it work for you. Now, financial aid and everything that everybody's done has helped that a lot, but I think, yeah, it's a part of life now, and I think it in some ways makes it easier to have even these meetings that I'm having now. It's like, okay, well, one of them's like, I don't see your role changing this next year. I know playing's important to you if it's the number one factor, then, but just to help them even go through that process of just sort of like recommitting to whatever, because you do have a short sporting career.
Yeah. Well, it's similar in many ways. I think when you're talking the current team, I want them to understand why they're here, right? And the bigger picture, right? This isn't just about this. It's not just about team. It's about everything. It's about Notre Dame, and understanding the value of the degree, right? I think is huge, and it resonates with most of them. And I think that's why you don't see a lot leave. It could be a ton. We do have big benches. We have a lot of people that don't play, but that's really important. But I think that whole conversation, like Chad said, just not, a lot of people will push people out. I'm not pushing anyone out. I understand, but this is a big deal. And then that's my job to manage the roster. If it gets a little bit bigger than I intended because of that, that's okay. Because I can, as long as I'm making people happy and being in touch, you can't make everybody happy, but really being in touch with everyone in the periphery, like people that aren't playing. But also with the portal, with the challenges of getting undergrads in here at Notre Dame, I'm okay with that. I'm okay, because we're kind of doing it the old school way, right? It's more that way. We have one or two, like Chad said, you've got to plug a hole and it works and they can get in and it lines up. But really, you want a team that's here, that wants to go to Notre Dame, that wants to be Notre Dame, and then is sitting here in however many years afterward and listening to some panel talk. So I kind of like it.
But I do, actually on that, I do think it's a powerful thing, and when I talk about it, it's graduate transfers sometimes these days, is we've, had one a year for the last few years. Lacrosse was kind of doing it, because it depends a little in the Ivy League, you can't redshirt, you can medically redshirt. So anyway, there's a lot of good Ivy League athletes that have another year of eligibility, and it's very powerful to bring someone with a completely different perspective in to be like, oh my gosh, you have all. So I find great power. And I think Notre Dame understands that too. It's just it's all these little details that help transfers come in. But I think the Holy Cross Gateway program's been an awesome addition for the student body to feel that. So I think it's something that when we can make it this powerful thing, because it is, once you come here as a freshman, you don't know anything other than this place. And so, there's always times like where you think the grass is greener elsewhere. So that's another way we use it.
So I'm getting the high sign that we're done.
Cool.
So in closing, what I heard is that your voice matters. Your presence matters to these teams. And even just the little things of a note. I would have thought, oh, I can't bother them with that. But that's what you're saying. And in the end, right, you are all recruiters. You're always recruiting the next leader. You're recruiting somebody to run an event. You're doing all of it. So think about what Salima said and channel your inner Missy Convoy. Okay? All right, thanks so much.
Thank you.